Nevermore. Nevermore. Nevermore.
Nevermore.
Nevermore.
Once upon a midnight dreary, as I pondered weak and weary,
over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore,
while I nodded, nearly napping,
Suddenly, there came a tapping.
as of someone gently rapping.
Rapping at my chamber door.
'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door.
Only this and nothing more.
Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December.
And each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor.
Eagerly I wished the morrow.
Vainly I had sought to borrow.
From my books surcease of sorrow.
Sorrow from the lost Lenore.
For the rare and radiant maiden who the angels named Lenore.
Nameless here forevermore.
And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain
Thrilled me.
Filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before.
so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating.
'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door.
Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door.
This is and nothing more.
Presently my soul grew stronger.
Hesitating then no longer.
Sir, said I, oh madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping.
And so faintly you came tapping.
Tapping at my chamber door.
That I scarce was sure I heard you.
Here I opened wide the door.
Darkness there and nothing more.
Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more. Nothing more.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad? This disease has sharpened my senses, not dulled, not destroyed them. Above all was a sense of hearing most acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth.
I heard many things in hell.
How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult, and for his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this.
He had the eye of a vulture.
A pale blue eye.
There's a fume over it.
Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad.
Madmen know nothing.
You should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work.
I was never kinder to the old man than I was during the week before I killed it.
And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I'd made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so as not to disturb the old man's sleep. It took me now to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha!
Did madmen have been so wise as these?
And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, cautiously for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single, thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found they are always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me,
But his evil eye.
And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he was passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at midnight, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. I watched his minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity.
I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph.
To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me. For he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to undo the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie back down. He was still sitting on the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan.
And I knew it was the groan of mortal terror.
It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe.
I knew the sound well.
Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying there awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney, which is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and encompassed the victim. It was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I waited a long time, very patiently, I resolved to open a very little crevice in the lantern. And so I opened it. And you cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a simple, dim ray, like a thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye.
It was open, wide open.
And I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it in perfect distinctness, all a double blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person.
For I had direct ray, as fine steeped, processed upon the dance board.
And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watchmakeman enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even then, I refrained and kept still.
I scarcely breathed.
I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant.
The old man's terror must have been extreme.
It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, and so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amidst the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. But even yet, I stood still. The beating grew louder. Louder!
As it hard at first,
And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once.
Once only.
In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But, for many minutes longer, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me, for it should not be heard through the walls. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, it's stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and left it there many minutes.
There was no pulsation.
It was stone dead. The eye would trouble me no longer.
You're seriously being mad.
You will think so no longer when I describe to you the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence.
First of all, I dismembered the corpse.
I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scaffolds. Then I replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye,
Not even his.
could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I've been far too worried for that. A tub had caught all. When I made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still and dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for again, what had I now to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I, myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But, ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached.
I fancied a ringing in my ears.
But still they sat and chatted.
The ringing became more distinct.
It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until, at length, I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt now I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice.
Yet the sound increased.
And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, like such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently.
But the noise steadily increased.
I arose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations.
But the noise steadily increased.
I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men.
But the noise steadily increased.
And oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair on which I'd been sitting, I raised it upon the boards. The noise arose overall and continually increased. Louder. I saw the men chatting pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. No, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, and this, I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I felt them scream and die. Now again. Louder. Louder! 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 Dance! Dissemble no more! I do the deed. Tear up the planks here! Here! It is the beating of this hideous heart.
Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, peering,
doubting,
dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before.
But the silence was unbroken.
And the stillness gave no token.
And the only word there spoken was the whispered word.
Lenore,
This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word.
Lenore.
Merely this and nothing more.
Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping.
Somewhat louder than before.
Surely, said I, surely, that is something at my window, that is.
Let me see then.
what thereat is.
And this mystery explore.
Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore.
Tis the wind and nothing more.
Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter.
In stepped the stately raven of the saintly days of yore.
Not the least obeisance made he.
Not a minute stopped or stayed he.
But with mien of lord or lady.
Perched above my chamber door.
Perched upon a bust of Pallas.
Just above my chamber door.
Perched and sat and nothing more.
Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling.
By the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore.
Though thy crest be shorn and shaven now,
I said,
but sure no craven.
ghastly grim and ancient raven.
Wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore.
Then the bird said,
Nevermore.
During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of evening drew on, within view of the melancholy house of Usher.
I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit.
I say insufferable because the feeling was unrelieved by any poetic sentiment with which a mind usually receives natural images of the desolate or terrible.
I looked upon the scene before me,
Upon the mere house, the simple landscape features of the domain.
upon the bleak walls,
Upon the vacant eye-like windows.
and upon a few rank sedges,
And upon a few white trunks of decayed trees.
with an utter depression of soul which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the dreams of the eater of opium.
The bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil.
There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart. What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the house of Usher? Musing upon this idea, I barely stopped my fall over the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that surrounded the house of Usher. I gazed down with a shudder at the reflected and inverted images of the grey sedge, the ghastly tree stems, and those vacant eye-like windows.
In this mansion of gloom, I now propose to myself a sojourn of some weeks with its proprietor.
Roderick Usher. Although as boys we had been even intimate associates.
Yet I really knew little of my friend. His reserve had always been excessive and habitual.
Many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me, a letter from him, which in its wildly importunate nature had required nothing other than a personal reply.
The writer spoke of an acute bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him.
And of an earnest desire to see me, as his best and indeed his only personal friend.
It was the apparent heart that went with his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation.
I was aware that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, for a peculiar sensibility of temperament.
The stem of the Usher race had put forth at no period any enduring branch. In other words, that the entire family lay in the direct line of descent, and had always so lain.
The name which had so identified the family and the house for so long was to merge the two titles as one, the House of Usher.
I now worked upon my imagination as to believe that about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to itself.
An atmosphere which was a pestilent and mystic vapour, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden hue.
I now scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building.
Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of the ages had been great.
Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled webwork from the eaves.
Yet there was no sign of any extraordinary dilapidation.
Although no individual portion of the masonry had fallen, there appeared to be a wild inconsistency between its adaptation of perfect parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stones.
In this there was much that reminded me of old woodwork, which had rotted for long years in some neglected vault.
Beyond this indication of extensive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability.
Perhaps the eye of a scrutinizing observer might have noticed a barely perceptible fissure, which, extending from the roof of the building,
Made its way down the wall in a zigzag direction until it became lost in the sullen waters of the Tarn.
I entered the Gothic archway of the hall, and was conducted in silence through dark and intricate passages. Much that I contributed on the way contributed to heighten the sentiments of doom which I have spoken.
While the objects around me,
while the carvings of the ceilings,
the somber tapestries of the walls,
The ebon blackness of the floors.
and the phantasmagorical armorial trophies which rattled as I strode.
I met the physician of the family. He accosted me with trepidation and passed on.
Feeble gleams of encrimsoned light made their way through the trellis panes. The eye, however, struggled in vain to reach the remoter angles of the chamber. Dark draperies hung upon the walls. I breathed in an atmosphere of sorrow. An air of stern, deep, and irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all.
Upon my entrance, Usher arose and greeted me.
I gazed upon him with a feeling half of pity, half of awe.
Surely men had never before been so terribly altered in so brief a period, as
Well,
had Roderick Usher.
It was with difficulty that I could admit the identity of this wasted creature before me with my companion of early boyhood.
Yet the character of his face remained at all times remarkable, a cadaverousness of complexion and eye large.
liquid and luminous beyond comparison.
Lips somewhat thin and very pallid. These features made up a countenance not easily to be forgotten.
The expression they seemed to convey was so much of a change that I doubted to whom I spoke.
Yet the now ghastly pallor of the skin and the now miraculous lustre of the eye.
Above all things, startled and even awed me. He had about him an excessive nervous agitation.
His action was alternately vivacious and sullen.
His voice varied rapidly from tremulous indecision.
His utterance was similar to that of the lost drunkard or the irredeemable eater of opium.
I suffer from a malady. It is a constitutional and a family evil, one which I despair to seek a remedy. I suffer from a morbid acuteness of the senses. I can wear only garments of certain textures. The odours of all flowers are oppressive. My eyes are tortured by even a faint light. I am bound to this dwelling which I tenant. There is a presence whose force could only be conveyed in terms too dark to be spoken aloud. An influence with which the very stones of my family home have dominated over my spirit.
The grey walls and turrets, the black tarn into which they all looked down, had at length brought about upon the morale of his existence.
I suffer from a long-lasting illness. Indeed, it has come to the rapidly approaching dissolution of my tenderly beloved sister, my sole companion for these long years. She is my last and only relative on earth. The decease would leave me the last of the ancient race of the Ushers.
While he spoke, the Lady Madeline,
For so she was called.
Passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment and,
Without having noticed my presence, she disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not unmingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings.
A sensation of stupor oppressed me as my eyes followed her retreating steps, when a door, at length, closed upon her.
the disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skills of her physicians. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and a partially cataleptic character was the unusual diagnosis.
She had steadily borne herself up against the pressure of her malady. They had not yet finally betaken herself to bed, but on the closing in of the evening of your arrival at the house, she succumbed at night with inexpressible agitation.
The prostrating power of the destroyer.
The brief glimpse you had obtained of her person probably be your last.
The lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more, and for several days ensuing, her name was unmentioned by the usher or myself. And during this period, I was busied with the earnest endeavour of alleviating the melancholy of my friend.
We painted and read together, or I listened as if in a dream to the wild improvisations of his speaking guitar, and thus,
As a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recess of his mind, Usher expressed an opinion. This opinion was that all things had a sentient consciousness, and his disordered belief was that this consciousness had bonded with the very stones of the house of Usher.
This, he believed, was fulfilled in the very method of construction of these stones.
by their placement and arrangement, as in that of the many moss and fungi which overspread them, and of the decayed trees whose roots had invaded the very fabric of the house of Usher.
He was of the opinion that the very house itself was alive and conscious.
The evidence of this consciousness can be seen in the gradual condensation of an atmosphere in the walls which gather in the black tar that surrounds the house. An influence which has molded the destinies of my family for generations, which makes me as I am now.
Nevermore.
The Lady Madeline is no more. It is my intention to have her corpse moved for a fortnight to one of the numerous vaults within these walls, or to her final interment in the earth.
The worldly reason for this proceeding is one which I did not feel I had the right to dispute.
I have come to this conclusion based on the unusual character of the illness of the deceased, also at the advice of the numerous doctors and of the exposed and remote location of the family burial ground.
At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arrangements for the temporary entombment.
The body having been placed in its coffin.
We bore it to rest. The vault in which we placed it was small, damp, and lying at a great depth immediately beneath the building.
It had been used, apparently, in remote feudal times for the worst purposes of the dungeon keep.
And in later days as a place for deposit of powder, for a portion of its floor was carefully covered with copper sheeting.
The door of massive iron had been also similarly protected. Its immense weight caused an unusually sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges.
Prince, Madeline and I had an unspoken bond which always connected us to each other.
The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all afflictions of strictly cataleptic nature, the mockery of a faint blush upon the bosom and the face.
And that suspiciously lingering smile, which is so terrible in death. We replaced the lid, and having secured the door of iron, made our way to the upper apartments of the house.
He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal and objectless step.
After many days of bitter grief had elapsed, observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of Usher. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten.
The pallor of his countenance, if possible, a more ghastly hue. The luminousness of his eye had utterly gone out.
The once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more, and a tremulous quaver, as if of extreme terror, habitually characterized his utterance.
There were times when I was obliged to dismiss his behavior as madness, for I beheld him with profound attention gazing upon vacancy, as if listening to some imaginary sound. It was on the 7th or 8th day after the placing of the Lady Madeline within the dungeon keep that I experienced the full power of such feelings. I struggled to reason off the nervousness which had dominion over me. There was upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm.
Peering earnestly within the intense darkness of the chamber hearkened
To certain low and indefinite sounds which came through the pauses of the storm at long intervals.
Overpowered by an intense horror,
I began pacing rapidly to and throughout the apartment.
I had made but a few turns in this manner when a light step on the adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher's.
In an instant afterward he rapped,
with a gentle touch at my door.
and entered bearing a lamp.
His countenance was as usual, cadaverously pale, but moreover there was a mad hilarity in his eyes, and evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor.
And you have not seen it? Huh? Have you not then seen it? Stay. You shall.
Thus speaking, he hurried to one of the casements and threw it freely open to the storm.
It was indeed a tempestuous and sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and its beauty. The exceeding density of the clouds which hung so low as to press upon the turrets of the house and enter the room.
Immediately around us were glowing in the unnatural light of a distinctly luminous and visible gaseous exhalation, which hung about and enshrouded the mansion.
This is merely electrical phenomena, not uncommon. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here. I will read one of your favorite romances. I'll read, and you listen. So we pass away this terrible night together.
The Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning.
There was little in its uncouth and unimaginative prolixity which could have held interest for the lofty and spiritual ideals of my friend.
It was, however, the only book immediately at hand, and I indulged the vague hope that the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief.
The history of mental disorders is full of similar phenomena.
And Ethelred, whom fearing the rising of the tempest, uplifted his mace outright, and with blows did break the plankings of the door, and pulling sturdily, he so cracked and ripped, and tore all asunder, that it reverberated throughout the forest.
I started for a moment and then paused, for it appeared to me that from some remote portion of the mansion there did come the echo of the sound of cracking timber.
But a stifled and dull one, certainly.
Amid the noises of the still increasing storm, I continued the story.
The good champion Ethelred, now entering within the door, was amazed to perceive a dragon of scaly demeanour and fiery tongue, who sat in guard before a mountain of gold upon a floor of silver, and on the wall there hung a shield of shining brass with this legend enwritten.
Who entereth herein a conqueror hath been, who slayeth the dragon the shield he shall win. And Ethelred uplifted his mace and struck upon the head of the dragon,
which fell before him with a shriek so horrid piercing that Ethelred did close his ears with his hands against them to poison it.
Here I again paused abruptly. For some distant room in the mansion, I did hear a sort of screaming or grating sound.
The exact counterpart of the dragon's unnatural shriek.
I looked over towards Usher. He appeared not to have noticed the sounds, but there was some sort of alteration in his demeanour.
I could but partially perceive his features. However, I noticed that his lips trembled as if murmuring inaudibly.
His head had dropped upon his breast.
The motion of his body, too, was at countenance with this idea, for he rocked from side to side with a gentle and constant sway.
I continued the narrative of Sir Lancelot Canning.
And now, Ethelred, having escaped the terrible fury of the dragon, did take for himself the brazen shield, but in his haste, the shield fell down at his feet upon the silver floor with a mighty, great, and terrible ringing sound.
And he became aware of a distinct, hollow metallic and clangorous, yet apparently muffled reverberation.
As if the shield of brass had indeed at that moment fallen upon the floor of silver. Completely unnerved, I leapt to my feet.
Yet the measured hearty movement of Usher remained undisturbed.
I rushed to the side of my friend.
His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity.
As I placed my hand on his shoulder, I noticed that he spoke in a low, gibbering murmur, unconscious of my presence.
I've heard. Yes, I've heard it. Long, many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it, but I dared not. Miserable wretch that I am, I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I tell you now that I first heard it many days ago. The first hollow movements in her coffin, but I dared not. I dared not speak. Where will I fly anon? Has she not come to upbraid me for my haste? Do I not hear her footsteps on the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman!
Here he shrieked out his syllables as though in the effort he were giving up his soul.
Madman! I tell you, she stands there now without the door!
At that moment the curtains blew asunder. There without the door stood the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher.
There was blood on the white robes and evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame.
For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold.
Then with a low moan of cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent
tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters.
And the deep, dank tarn at my feet closed silently and sullenly over the fragments of the house of Usher.
Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly.
Though its answer little meaning,
Little relevancy bore.
for I cannot help agreeing.
That no living human being
Ever yet was blessed to sing bird above his chamber door.
Bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door.
with such name as
Nevermore.
And the raven sitting lonely on that placid bust spoke only that one word.
As if its soul and that one word it did outpour.
Nothing further than he uttered.
not a feather than he fluttered.
Till I scarcely more than muttered.
Other friends have flown before.
On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before.
Nevermore.
Startled at the silence broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless said I, what it utters is its only stock and store.
Caught from some unhappy master.
From unmerciful disaster.
Followed fast and followed faster.
Till his songs one burden bore.
Till the dirges of his hope of melancholy burden bore, of never.
Nevermore.
But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheel the cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door.
Then upon the velvet sinking.
I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy.
Thinking what this ominous bird of yours
What this grim,
Ungainly,
Ghastly.
Gaunt.
An ominous bird of yore.
meant in croaking.
Nevermore.
But when injury ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat.
At length you would be avenged.
This was a point definitely settled.
As the messer must avoid any risk.
I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself known to he who has done the wrong. It must be said that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my way, to smile in his face, though he could not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation.
He had a weak point.
This Fortunato.
Though in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared.
He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine.
Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit.
Fortunato, like his countrymen,
Was a quack.
But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere.
In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself and bought largely whenever I could. It was dusk, during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend.
He accosted you with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much.
The man wore motley.
He had on a tight, beauty-struck costume.
His head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells of a fool.
You were so pleased to see him.
What was it you said to him?
My dear Fortunato, you luckily met. How remarkable are you looking today? But I received a cask of what passes for amontillado, and I have my doubts.
A cask? In the middle of the carnival? Impossible!
I have my doubts. And I was silly enough to pay the full amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were nowhere to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain.
Amontillado!
I have my doubts.
Amontillado!
And I must satisfy you.
Amontillado!
As you are engaged, I'm on my way to Lucrezia. If anyone has a critical eye, it is he. He will tell me.
Lucrezia cannot tell Amontillado from sherry.
And yet some will say he has a taste to match your own.
Come, let us go.
Where?
To your palazzo.
My friend, no. I'll not engage upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. I shall ask Lucrezia.
I have no engagement. Come.
My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cough from which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre.
Let us go nevertheless. The cough is merely nothing. Amontillado. You have been imposed upon, and as for Lucrezia, he cannot distinguish Amontillado from church sherry.
Thus speaking and putting on a mask, you suffered him to hurry to your palazzo.
There were no attendants at home.
They had absconded to make merry in honor of the carnival.
I had told them I should not return until morning.
Then you took 2 lanterns and leading him down into the vault.
You two stood together above the catacombs of the damp grounds of the Montresors.
Forward to the cask.
It is farther on. But observe the white patches which gleam from the cabin walls.
Nitre?
Nitre. How long have you had that cough?
It is nothing.
Come, let us go back. Your health is precious.
He was rich.
Respected.
Admired. Beloved.
Happy as once we were.
He was a man who would be missed.
For me, it is no matter.
We will go back.
He will be ill.
And we cannot be responsible.
Besides, there is Lucrezia.
Enough. The coughs mean nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough.
True. And indeed, I had no intention of causing unnecessary alarm. But we must make all proper precautions. A draught of this Medoc will protect us from the damp.
Here I handed him a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows which lay upon the mould.
Drink.
You said, presenting him the wine.
I raised it to his lips with a deed.
He paused and nodded to you familiarly while his bells jingled.
I drink to the buried that repose around us.
And I to your long life.
He again took my arm and we proceeded.
These vaults are extensive.
The Montresors were a great and numerous family.
I forget your arms.
A huge human foot adore in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel.
And the motto?
Nemo me impune lacessit.
No one attacks me with impunity.
Good.
The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled.
Your own fancy grew warm within the dock.
You passed through long walls of piled skeletons.
Oh look, we are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle amongst the bones. We'll go back before it is too late.
It is nothing. But first another draught of the Medoc.
You handed him a flagon of de Grave.
He emptied it at a breath.
His eyes flashed with a fierce light.
He laughed, pursued the bottle upwards with a gesture you did not understand.
You looked at him in surprise.
He repeated the movement, a grotesque one.
You do not comprehend?
Not I.
You are not of the Brotherhood.
How so?
You are not a Mason.
Yes, I am a Mason. After a fashion.
You, a Mason? Impossible!
A Mason?
A sign.
It is this.
You answered, producing from beneath the folds of your cloak a trowel.
You jest! But let us proceed.
Be it so.
Replacing the tool beneath your cloak and again offering him your arm.
He leaned upon it heavily.
You continued on your route in search of the Amontillado.
Passing through a range of low arches.
Descending again, we arrived at Deep Creek.
In which the foulness of the air caused our lanterns rather to glow than burn.
At the most remote end of the creek, there appeared another less spacious.
Its walls had been lined with human remains.
Hard to the vault overhead.
In the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris.
Proceed. Herein is the Amontillado. And as for the crates,
He's an ignoramus.
You steadied him as he stepped unsteadily forward.
Following immediately at his heels.
Walked into a dark hall within the wall.
His progress was halted by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered.
A moment more and we had fastened him to the ground.
In its surface were 2 iron loops, distant about 2 feet horizontally.
From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock.
Throwing the links about his waist.
It was but the work of a few seconds to secure it.
He was too much astounded to resist.
Withdrawing the key, you stepped back from the recess.
pass your hand over the wall. cannot help feel the nitre. Indeed, it's very damp. Once more allow me to implore you to return. No? Well, then I must positively leave you. But first I must render you all the little attentions in my power.
The amontillado!
Oh, true. The amontillado.
You soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar.
With this, and with the aid of your trowel, you began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche.
Scarcely had the first tier of masonry been laid when the intoxication of Fortunato had gone on.
The first indication of this was a low rolling cry from the depths of the recess.
It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence, as the second tier was raised,
And third, and the fourth, and then was heard the great vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which you paused and listened with satisfaction.
When the clanking had subsided, you resumed working with the trowel.
The wall was now nearly level with the rest.
holding your lantern over the mason work. If for a few feeble rays upon the figure would be
A succession of loud and shrill screams began bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, and passing a hand over the solid fabric of the wall, felt satisfied.
You reapproached the wall and replied to the yells of he within.
It was now midnight, and the task was drawing to a close.
There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in.
Struggling with its weight, it was placed partially in its destined position.
But then there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head.
It was succeeded by a sad voice. It was that of the oboe funcilado.
A good joke. An excellent jest. We have many which laugh about it at the palazzo. About wine.
The Amontillado.
Yes, the Amontillado. But isn't it getting late? Will they not be waiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone.
Oh yes, let us be gone.
For the love of God, Montresor!
Yes, for the love of God.
But to this you waited in vain for a reply.
Fortunato.
No answer.
Fortunato.
No answer still. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bell. Hurrying to make an end of the labor, he placed the final stone in position and plastered it up. Against the new masonry was re-erected the old rampart of bone, and for the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them.
Requiescat in pace.
engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core.
This and more I sat divining,
with my head at ease reclining,
On the cushion's velvet lining,
That the lamplight gloated o'er.
But whose violet velvet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er.
She shall press on!
Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed by some unseen censer, swung by seraphim.
Whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor.
Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee.
by the angels he hath sent thee.
Respite, respite, end of thee.
from thy memories of Lenore.
Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore.
Quoth the raven.
Nevermore.
Prophet said I thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or tempest tossed thee here ashore.
Desolate yet all undone.
On this desert land enchanted,
On this home by horror haunted.
Tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead?
Tell me, tell me!
I implore!
Quoth the raven!
With a feeling of deep yet most singular affection, I regarded my friend Morella. Thrown by accident into her society many years ago, my soul from our first meeting burned with fires it had never before known. But the fires were not of Eros, and bitter and tormenting to my spirit was the gradual conviction that I could in no manner define their unusual meaning or regulate their vague intensity. Yet we met, and fate bound us together at the altar, and I never spoke of passion nor thought of love. She, however, shunned society, and attaching herself to me alone, rendered me happy.
Morella's erudition was profound.
Her talents were of no common order. Her powers of mind were gigantic.
I felt this, and in many matters became her pupil. She placed before me a number of those mystical writings which are normally considered the mere dross of the early German literature.
These, for what reason you could not imagine, were her favourite and constant study.
And that, in process of time, they became my own. In all this, no tincture of the mysticism which I read was by me discovered, unless I am greatly mistaken, in either my deeds or thoughts. Persuaded of this, I entered with an unflinching heart into the intricacies of my wife's studies.
And then?
Then, when poring over forbidden pages, I felt a forbidden spirit enkindling within me. Would Morella place her cold hand upon my own?
And rake up from the ashes of a dead philosophy some low, singular words, whose meaning burned themselves in upon your memory.
Hour after hour would I linger by her side,
And dwell upon the music of her voice, until at length its melody was tainted with terror.
and there fell a shadow upon my soul, and I grew pale and shuddered inwardly at those two unearthly tones.
And thus to you, joy suddenly faded into horror, and the most beautiful became the most hideous.
The incantations growing out of the ancient volumes I have mentioned formed almost the sole conversation of Morella and myself.
By the learned they would be readily grasped, and by the unlearned they would be little understood.
Since consciousness always accompanies thinking, it is this which distinguishes us from other living beings, giving us our personal identity.
The notion of that identity, which at death is or is not lost forever, was to you at all times a consideration of intense interest.
Indeed, the time had now arrived when the mystery of my wife's manner oppressed me as a spell.
I could no longer bear the touch of her wan fingers, nor the low tone of her musical language, nor the lustre of her melancholy eyes.
Then you longed with an earnest and consuming desire.
For the moment of Morella's decease, I did.
But the fragile spirit clung to its tenement of clay for many days, for many weeks, and irksome months, until your tortured nerves obtained the mastery over your mind, and you grew furious through delay, and with the heart of a fiend you cursed the days and the hours and the bitter moments that seemed to lengthen and lengthen as her gentle life declined, like shadows in the dying of the day.
But one autumnal evening, when the winds lay still in heaven, Morella called me to her bedside.
There was a dim mist upon the earth, and a warm glow upon the waters, and amid the rich October leaves of the forest, a rainbow from the firmament had surely fallen.
It is a day of days, a day of all days, either to live or to die. It is a fair day for the sons of earth and life. Ah, more fair for the daughters of heaven and death. I am dying.
Yet shall I live.
Morella.
There was never a day when thou couldst love me.
But her whom in life thou didst abhor, in death thou shalt adore.
Morella.
I repeat, I am dying. But within me is a pledge of that affection.
Ah, how little which thou didst feel for Morella.
When my spirit departs, shall the child live.
Thy child and mine. Morella.
Thy days shall be days of sorrow, that sorrow which has the most lasting of impressions, as the cypress is the most enduring of trees. For thy hours of happiness are over, and thou shalt carry about thy shroud on the earth as do the Muslim at Mecca.
Morella, how knowest thou this?
But she turned away her face upon the pillow, and a slight tremor coming over her limbs, she thus died.
Yet, as she had foretold, her child, which in dying she had given birth, which breathed not until the mother breathed no more, her child, a daughter, lived. And she grew strangely in stature and intellect, and was the perfect resemblance of her who had thus departed.
And I loved her with a love more fervent than I had believed it possible to feel for any denizen of earth.
But ere long the heaven of that pure affection darkened, and gloom and horror and grief swept over it in clouds.
I said the child grew strangely in stature and intelligence.
Strange indeed was her rapid increase in bodily size.
But terrible, oh terrible were the tumultuous thoughts which crowded upon me while watching the development of her mental being.
Could it be otherwise when you daily discovered in the conceptions of the child the adult powers and faculties of the woman?
When the lessons of experience fell from the lips of infancy.
Or when the wisdoms and passions of maturity are found hourly gleaming from its full and speculative eye.
When, I say, all this became evident to my poor senses, when I could no longer hide it from my soul.
Is it to be wondered at that suspicions of a nature fearful and exciting crept in upon your spirit? Or that your thoughts fell back aghast upon the wild tales and the thrilling theories of the entombed Morella?
I hid from the scrutiny of the world a being whom destiny compelled me to adore, and in the rigorous seclusion of our home watched with an agonizing anxiety over all which concerned the beloved.
And as the years rolled away,
and I gazed day after day upon her holy and mild and eloquent face,
and pored over her maturing form.
Day after day did I discover new points of resemblance in the child to her mother, the melancholy and the dead.
Hourly darkened shadows of similitude.
and more full, and more definite,
And more perplexing.
And more hideously terrible in their aspect.
For that her smile was like her mother's I could bear.
But then you shuddered at its too perfect identity, that her eyes were like morella's.
I could endure, but then they too often looked down into the depths of my soul with Morella's own intense and bewildering meaning. And in the remnants of the silken hair, and in the wan fingers which buried themselves therein, and in the sad musical tones of her speech, and above all, in the phrases and expressions of the dead on the lips of the loved and the living, I found food for consuming thought and horror, for a worm that would not die!
Thus faded away the luster of her life, and my daughter remained nameless and unbaptized upon the earth.
My child, and my love.
Morella's name died with her at her death.
Of the mother I had never spoken, to the daughter it was impossible to speak of her.
Yet, during the brief period of her existence, the latter knew nothing of the outside world. The sacred rite of baptism presented itself to your agitated mind as a possible deliverance from the terrors of destiny.
At the baptismal font I hesitated for a name. Many titles of the wise and beautiful, of old and modern times, came thronging to my lips. What prompted me then to disturb the memory of the buried dead? What demon urged me to breathe that sound which in its very recollection was wont to make ebb the purple blood in torrents from the temples to the heart? What fiend spoke from the recesses of my soul when amid those dim aisles I whispered within the ears of the holy man the syllables, Morella? What fiend convulsed the features of my child and overspread them with the hues of death, as starting at that scarcely audible sound she turned her glassy eyes from the earth to heaven, and falling prostrate on the black slabs of our ancestral vault responded,
I am here! Distinct, coldly, calmly distinct fell those few simple sounds within your ears. And then, like molten lead, rolled hissingly into the brain. Years may pass, but the memory of that epoch, never.
I kept no reckoning of time or place, and the stars of my fate faded from heaven, and the earth grew dark, and its figures passed by me like flitting shadows. And among them all I beheld only
Morella.
The winds of the firmament breathed but one sound within my ears, and the ripples upon the sea murmured evermore,
Morella.
But she died, and with my own hands I bore her to the tomb. And I laughed with a long and bitter laugh, as I found no traces of the first in the charnel where I laid the second. Morella.
Nevermore!
Said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us and that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aiden
it shall clasp a sainted maiden,
Whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden.
whom the angels name Lenore, quoth the raven.
Nevermore.
Be that word our shining parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of the lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beat from out my heart and thy form from off my door.
Quoth the raven.
Nevermore.
And the raven,
Never flitting.
still is sitting,
Still is sitting.
on the pallid bust of Pallas just above about my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted.
Nevermore.